Happy Memorial Day weekend. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, as Memorial Day approached, a growing scandal at the VA over shoddy care for veterans. Congressman Paul Ryan hints at a 2016 presidential run, telling supporters to keep their powder dry. More recalls at GM. That's become kind of chronic. Water main breaks plague the city, and new numbers show the state of Wisconsin will finish 2015 with a $100 million surplus. But we start with a shooting in Milwaukee, one that has people wondering, when is enough enough? A 10-year-old girl caught in a crossfire on a playground. The neighborhood reacted with outrage, and Police Chief Ed Flynn reacted strongly.
Two young so-called men felt the need to engage in a shootout without any regard for the lives of children playing nearby. Now, this is the second 11-year-old we've had shot in a week. This is beyond a police problem. And believe me, we take responsibility for our part of it. We're going to catch these little skunks. We're going to put them in jail. But that's obviously not enough.
But despite all the talk about enough is enough, what does that mean? And will anything really change? Joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, blogger Alex Runner, and Media Tracker's Brian Sikma. Okay, so Alex Runner, what does enough mean? The governor and the police chief implying that we need to have more gun legislation. Will that make a difference?
What I really think, I've been to a number of police meetings, community meetings in this neighborhood and other neighborhoods, and what I always think about is by the time someone gets shot, it's almost too late. When I see people throwing trash in the yard or disrespecting themselves, disrespecting others, that's the time I think where we need to be outraged and say, this boy could grow into a man who's going to devalue life in a greater way. So I think the legislation with guns, I do think guns, there are too many easy ways for people to get guns in the central city who are criminals.
So you want to crack down on littering?
I think the whole devaluing of human life, including people throwing McDonald's bags out of their car window, I think you're saying it's much more systemic. Okay, Michael Holt, this comes the week after ceasefire week, which apparently the gangbangers didn't get the memo. They didn't go to the walk. They weren't in church. So what is going to take, what will it take for this community to say enough is enough, and what will that mean?
Well, the mayor, the chief of police, and James Causey in his column Thursday or Friday were saying that, instead of these mandatory sentencing, there are those who also say that, if we enforce the laws that are already in place, we can stem the tide. Yeah. Or we can start doing some other things they did in New York with stop and frisk. So we stop, we had to give away civil liberties, but we stop and frisk everybody.
Except here's the problem with some of those ideas, and I don't necessarily oppose them. Some of the same folks that are out there saying enough is enough, we ought to do some of those things, would be the first people to have the candlelight vigils and the march and protest. Same folks who would object to mandatory minimum sentences, same folks who would object to stop and frisk.
Have them talk to Sierra Guyton's parents, while she's on life support. Show pictures of all of these kids who have been murdered. I have no tolerance. I'm with Alice. Really? I have absolutely no tolerance for these terrorists. And then that's exactly what we're fighting. This is a war on terrorism right here in Milwaukee, right here in the United States. And we need to take some drastic action.
Yeah, what Milwaukee needs, we don't need a mayor in Milwaukee who wants to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and say, oh, our criminals need to bring their guns in so we can melt them down and make them into gardening tools. That's utterly ridiculous. We need a mayor who's going to say enough is enough and put more police on the streets, who's going to talk to the communities and say, when these young men violate the law, we are going to put them in jail and we are going to keep them there. He needs to invest in the community. And
the real purpose, and I think this thing has gone totally off track. The real purpose of that Sabbath day and the gun buyback was to get some good people engaged in the discussion, so that they would be turning their relatives.
It was to make the beautiful people feel good about themselves and go through the motions as if they're actually doing something, as opposed to doing things that would make a difference.
Would not kill anybody.
But here's the question: is whether or not those meaningless things actually are negative, because they give the impression that you're doing something when in fact you're doing nothing.
Well, I think, Charlie, as we've talked about, there's a bigger systemic cultural problem. We have an insurgency that's going on in our inner city of Milwaukee. There's a breakdown of society. society. We have the school system failing. We have parents failing. We have churches failing. Now we have the community that can't really come together and find out what they want to do. And we have the leaders of Milwaukee are not sure if they want to put more police officers on the street or less. They want to go out and stand for something, demand more laws be passed, but they're not actually changing the type of judges we have in Milwaukee County that let these people off in light sentences.
You're the first person to actually mention the criminal justice system in this town. I mean, the reality is that, while you have James Causey talking about a 3.5-year, mandatory minimum sentence for carrying a gun.
So what? Because the judge can take care of that.
We don't put people in jail who commit crimes with guns for that. We have a district attorney, John Chisholm, who's more interested in pursuing his John Doe witch hunts than he is in enforcing these laws. We plea bargain down many of these crimes. This district attorney's office has been asking for very, very short sentences. We have liberal judges who've really presided over a revolving door criminal justice system. So every suggestion here I think is good, but if the cops arrest every single bad actor in town, it doesn't matter if John Chisholm then plea bargains down the charge. It doesn't matter if liberal judges let them out. Those guys are going to be out on the street. So the whole notion that you can just pass more laws isn't going to make a difference. What has your glass half full, and what has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
My glass half full because there is community-wide outrage over the shooting of 10-year-old Sierra Guyton. The shooting opened people's eyes about senseless gun violence. My glass is half empty because if history provides the best examples, the outrage will simmer for a couple of weeks and then die out. And that's the real crime.
Michelle Litchens.
It's half full because this weekend we take time to recognize Americans who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our country. But it's half empty because far too many Americans see it as just another excuse to grill out.
Alex Runner.
My glass is half empty because the VA health system, which we'll talk about, has been a disaster for decades. This weekend, Memorial Day weekend, reminds us of those who risked their lives for our freedom, and we must demand a better system for them. My glass is half full because Mary Burke is running a strong campaign and polling neck and neck with incumbent Governor Scott Walker. Wisconsin needs your strong fiscal sense, Mary. Keep it up.
Brian Sickma.
Well, my glass is half full because the 3,407 applicants for Wisconsin's successful statewide school choice program show that capping the program at just 1,000 students makes no sense. But my glass is half empty because once upon a time, lawmakers like ex-Senator Van Wanggaard and outgoing Senator Mike Ellis favored limiting these positive programs.
Well, my glass is half full because, as Michael mentioned, the community is reacting with genuine outrage to the shooting of Sierra Guyton. It's half empty because I'm afraid that all we will get is another meaningless ceasefire week. Next on Sunday Insight, how tight is the governor's race? We'll talk about the latest poll numbers when we come back. A new Marquette University law poll shows a tightening race for governor. Among registered voters, the poll found that Governor Scott Walker and Democrat challenger Mary Burke are tied at 46% apiece. Among likely voters, Walker holds a 3-point lead, 48-45. And among voters who say they are certain to vote, Walker leads by 5, 50-45. So what does this poll actually tell you right now, Brian Sickma?
It tells us what we already knew, which is the fact that Governor Walker is going to have a very competitive re-election fight ahead of him, that Mary Burke is going to have basically the benefit of being the Democratic candidate. As we saw, as I pointed out once, Brett Halsey in this poll gets 38% against Scott Walker. I don't think that's a testament to Brett Halsey's brilliant campaign strategy. I think that just shows how many people in Wisconsin don't like Scott Walker. On the other hand, the governor's approval rating is very solid. That's what you want to see right now. I think the governor's still ahead in this race right now.
Okay, Alex Runner.
Brett Halsey's at 38%. That's amazing.
Actually, you got a 2% approval rating, I think, which I think it may be a record. I don't think I've ever seen an approval rating quite that low.
Well, I mean, I agree. I think it's going to be a very competitive race. I think based on our sluggish job numbers, I know we look at the numbers differently. I think based on that, I think Mary Burke has to get out there. She has to get louder. But when I just saw her at Marquette Law School not too long ago, I was really impressed. I think she's very smart, and I think she's a strong candidate.
Okay, but does this poll actually tell us anything different?
No, I don't know that anything. No, I guess not.
Okay.
The one thing that I think we learned from this poll, other than we knew that the state was always going to be close, but we also learned a few things. When it said 67% of the people polled strongly agree that they distrust or agree or strongly strongly agree, anyway, that they distrust government, or 90% agree or strongly agree that the government wastes tax dollars, that is saying that most of the electorate out there is frustrated with government
very
expansion.
Skeptical of government.
Exactly, which means that that is going to lean well for Republicans as well.
Well, that last bit of data surely doesn't surprise me. I think more and more people will be cynical. I think the key to this election is how many people are going to show up.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
You know, and I don't think this is, I mean, this is not a presidential year. So,
Right.
you know, I'm a little surprised that she's tightening it up at this particular point, but it's a long way away.
I think that's the key point, is that a poll of registered voters is pretty much meaningless because these are a lot of those voters aren't the ones who are going to show up. This is going to be a turnout election. The off-year elections tend to be a smaller turnout, so the likely voter, the certain to vote voter is important. Look, I do think that there's no question about it. The conservatives should not be cocky about it. This is going to be a tough race. Mary Burke is going to be well-funded. Plus, there's about 45% of the electorate that's going to vote for anybody other than Scott Walker. But on the other hand, there's some underlying dynamics in this poll. Right track, wrong track, by a margin of 10 points. People in this poll said they think Wisconsin is on the right track. Walker's approval rating is above above water. 49% say they approve of his record. So I think those overall dynamics would suggest that it's pretty much where we're at. There was also a slight oversample or a significant increase in the sampling of Democrats in this poll compared to March. Now, we don't know which was right or wrong, but if you include the leaners, it was Democrats plus 8 points in March. In this poll, it's Democrats plus 12.6%. So there is a shift. But I do think that it's going to be a competitive race. There's no question about it. But I certainly wouldn't be hitting the panic button on either side. I mean, there's going to be a lot of money. I think the real question is going to be whether or not Mary Burke's able to go and parlay these poll numbers nationally into getting some more money.
Well, one thing I did notice in the poll is that people like business experience, and you can kind of see that one narrow aspect of Mary Burke's resume possibly coming out. That was the brightest moment I saw in the poll for her. The problem with it, though, is the fact that you have Mary Burke has to appeal to a diverse coalition. She has labor unions in there that are upset that she outsourced jobs overseas as a Trek executive. So her whole campaign is premised on holding a very loose coalition together.
She's still not very well known, which again,
that's another big problem.
Again gives the Walker campaign and conservatives a chance to define her. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
Mine is to NBA owner Mark Cuban, who said he would cross the street if a black youth wearing a hoodie approached him. I'm sure George Zimmerman had the same prejudice when he saw Trayvon Martin, but Zimmerman had a gun.
Michelle Lichens.
To Brett Halsey with a 2.5% favorability rating, you may want to swap your Civil War uniform for your Birkebeiner Warrior outfit for your next event.
Alex Runner.
My unsolicited advice is to those who think adding more police officers to the MPD is the answer, Michelle Lichens. It's not. We already have more officers per capita than nearly every major city. And as one of our assistant chiefs has often told me, police don't make neighborhoods better. What we need is to pay more attention to the causes of violence and invest our time, energy, and resources to helping young men know that life is valuable.
Brian Sickma.
Well, my unsolicited advice is for Waukesha Alderman Aaron Perry. If you're running for state assembly as a Republican and saying you're against tax increases, you probably shouldn't have voted for a tax hike in Waukesha.
Well, my advice is for the prosecutors in the John Doe investigation targeting conservative groups. Look, you've lost in state court, you lost in federal court, and now you've lost in the federal appeals court. It's time for John Chisholm and company to shut down the witch hunt and get back to prosecuting real criminals. It's just my 2 cents. Next on Sunday Insight, is this any way to take care of our veterans? We'll talk about the health care we provide the men and women who protect our country. A growing scandal at the VA draws bipartisan condemnation, a presidential pledge to root out corruption, but no firings. President Obama addressed reports that dozens of veterans had died after being placed on secret waiting lists, but did not ask for the resignation of VA Secretary Eric Shinseki. So far, Obama has weathered scandals involving the IRS, targeting of conservatives, Fast and Furious, and Benghazi. Is this one any different, and why, Michael Holt?
Well, as you know, I'm a veteran, and I utilize the VA Center here in Milwaukee, Zablocki, and I have received excellent care. Now, maybe Milwaukee's a little bit different because they have this connection and this partnership with the medical college, and they use a lot of the same doctors you'll find at Freighter, etc. That said, this is atrocious, but it's been going on for years and years and years. So, I mean, all of these politicians talk all of this support for our military and stuff. They really haven't proven that they truly, truly support the military. Don't give us a free meal on Memorial Day. Straighten this mess out. Head should fly.
Okay, should Eric Shinseki have been fired?
Well, since it dates back, it's kind of like a toss-up. I think everybody else should be fired. So, I mean, if you go down to Phoenix and some other places, they should just clean sweep.
Okay. Should he be fired?
Well, I think the whole administration should be gone, actually. This is what happens when you get a single-payer system. This is what happens when the government is completely responsible for all of those hospitals and the consumers have no choice at all where to go for these services. Those bureaucrats were receiving bonuses. They were receiving thousands of dollars in bonuses down in Phoenix when people were dying on secret waiting lists. This is unacceptable. We need to get rid of the VA administration completely.
Okay, Alex.
I totally agree with Michelle on the woman who's in charge in Phoenix. I believe is still not fired, and I believe she's still getting her bonuses. But you know, it's interesting to hear Michael talk about the great experience he's had, because I just talked to my great uncle, who was a World War II paratrooper. He said for the last 60 years he's always been told stay away from the VA. He's told his other veteran friends. I wonder what you've heard with the honor flight, because it seems like it's had this reputation for decades to be such a dangerous place.
But Zablocki does get good marks. Yeah. Zablocki does get good marks. Brian Sykes.
This is a big problem. The Veterans Administration is a vital part of the commitment that we make to the men and women that serve in the U.S. military, but we shouldn't have a two-tiered health care system where we put veterans in the lowest tier possible, and that's what this scandal reveals. If you go to Guantanamo Bay right now, where we hold the worst of our enemies and the jihadis that are against us, they get 1.5 patient-to-doctor ratio. In the VA system, there are 35 veterans for every medical professional that's working. That is unacceptable. We need to give every single veteran a card that they can take to their local hospital and get the care they need.
I guess I think this is a problem for the Obama administration in two respects. Number one, his failure to take leadership role on this. I thought his performance last week was incredibly weak. But leaving aside the scandal itself, I think the larger problem is the fact that a lot of people are connecting the dots and realizing that for years, liberals have been arguing that the VA was a great model for government-controlled health care. And I think people are looking at what's happening with the VA centers and saying that this is what the future of Obamacare holds for a lot of other Americans. So is what they said this week the same as what you heard? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Well, the Department of Energy said crude oil prices are going up again because U.S. inventories fell more than expected. What I heard was more BS to justify the exploitation of the American consumer.
Michelle Litchens.
Well, for years, Democrats have preached about tolerance of others and open-mindedness. And this week, I heard Democrats tell the Bratfest in Madison that they cannot have a pro-life person talk about suicide prevention. That would be too offensive.
Alex Runner.
Well, this week, New York Times media columnist David Carr took on his publisher, his former boss, and his future boss, saying that there were multiple management failings in the hiring and the firing of Jill Abramson. What I heard is that old-fashioned truth-telling journalism is alive and well in Carr and the Times. Will be okay.
Brian Stickman.
Well, liberal economist Paul Krugman in 2006 said that the Veterans Administration was, quote, a health care system that has been highly successful in containing cost, yet provides excellent care, unquote. Well, what I hear today is a lame and inaccurate attempt to promote government control of health care.
Well, President Obama said he wouldn't tolerate abuses in the VA. What I heard, well, nobody got fired and we need to have another study, and maybe this will all blow over like all my other scandals. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
Loser, all of us. With this being Memorial Day weekend, the thought occurred to me that I felt safer in Vietnam than I do walking some streets in Milwaukee. Blame poverty, despair, hopelessness, and then talk to the parents of Sierra Guyton. My winners to my brother veterans. All of us gave something, some of us gave all. This is your day. Enjoy it.
Michelle Litchens.
My loser this week is CNN for not covering the Benghazi hearing. They continue to capitulate to activists on the left instead of covering the news. Your job is to report the news, not to decide what we need to hear. Thank God for the internet. My winners are all the veterans who've given their lives for our country, especially Sergeant Heidi Rue of Kiel, who was killed in Kosovo this month. We can never thank you enough for our freedom and the freedom of so many others in the world. Thank you.
Alex Runner.
My winners for the week are two local organizations, MICA and the Black Health Coalition of Wisconsin, who argued in court that the zoo interchange expansion fails to consider public transit needs. They won the lawsuit, so the state will pay more than $11 million for new county bus routes. As a bus rider, I say thanks. My loser for the week is the city of Pewaukee, which is actually attempting to foreclose on community-based Spring Creek Church for not paying stormwater fees, despite the fact that Spring Creek doesn't use the municipal system and has followed the city's own instructions in investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in its own stormwater system. Pewaukee is acting like a capricious kangaroo court, not a responsible governmental body. These parishioners deserve much better.
Brian Stickman.
My loser this week is the state of Illinois. Under Democrat Governor Pat Quinn, the state has suffered from $27 billion in tax hikes since 2011. At that same time, Wisconsin under Governor Scott Walker has seen $2 billion in tax cuts. My heroes this Memorial Day weekend are the men and women whose names are inscribed in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. They fell defending freedom, and although not fully appreciated at the time, on Monday and every day we salute them and all those who have paid the highest price.
Well, winner of the nation's veterans who served and sacrificed for their country. Tomorrow we'll remember those who gave their all. Losers, the nation's vets, who have been so outrageously neglected and abused by the VA centers that put them on secret waiting lists for care. So far, though, the buck stops nowhere. Thanks for joining us, and have a great Memorial Day weekend.